Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Big Bros podcast. My name is Ilan and I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Jeremy. Jeremy, how are you?
I'm well, mate. How are you?
I'm really good, man. It's a nice cold Sunday evening, but I'm very excited to discuss the topic of adopting a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So expect this episode, we will be defining what it is to have a growth versus fixed mindset, why it's so important to recognize and be aware of what those two things mean, how they translate into our everyday life, and we'll be drawing on some personal examples where we have had to confront our own fixed and growth mindsets. Hope you guys enjoy. So Jeremy, tell me, what is a growth mindset and how does it differ from a fixed mindset?
Now, a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Look, before we kick into the actual definition, I think it's all easy and good and well for us to sit here and say, we've all got growth mindsets. We're all ambitious, desirable people that want to strive for the best. But I think it's actually nice to get a definition to really understand what it is to have a growth mindset and a fixed mindset, because we might have elements of both and that's okay. So a growth mindset, I believe, is more so the belief that your basic qualities are things that you can cultivate through your efforts. And it's more so about thinking about where you can improve in life, okay? So it's tackling situations, some new situations, some not so new situations, but generally with a mindset that you can improve here, you can adapt, you can change, and you might not know how to navigate these certain situations, but you're willing to learn and know how to cultivate a mindset where you can overcome things. Fixed mindset, on the other hand, I believe is where you've got these certain qualities and personality traits about yourself, and they're kind of set in stone. You believe that these qualities of yours are set in stone, they're permanent, and you cannot change or adapt. Or if you can change and adapt, it'll be really, really hard, and you might not be prepared to take the steps to make those changes. What do you think?
I think it's quite interesting because it shows that individuals have a capacity and free will to decide whether they believe their own qualities are set in stone, as you said, or it's something that they can evolve. Because if you're taking up any new task and you've never done it before, say you want to learn the piano, you will struggle with it. And you might at that moment in time think that you're a failure because you can't, play a song, you can't construe a bunch of notes together. What that's actually reflecting is that you're failing at that moment in time. But what I find interesting about the whole growth mindset is what you described there, is that it's at a given time point, meaning that 2-3 months down the line, if you're consistently practicing your piano skills, or any skill for that matter, you will start developing. And it kind of makes sense because even with our own brains, when we want to start doing something new or a new skill, our brains are constantly rewiring. So I just like that whole idea also that, we as humans can actually decide whether we want to have a fixed or a growth mindset.
Yeah, and in school, it's something that can be really difficult at times. Like a really good example that I like to think of when thinking about fixed or growth mindset is, it's one that I came across in a book I read recently, and it said that you're a kid in school, you're in maths class, and this is all really relatable, by the way, because I know I've been there before, and I'm sure you've been there before as well, especially in maths class, not my greatest cup of tea.
Neither.
But you're in school, you're in maths class, and the teacher is calling on you to answer a question. Even more daunting, perhaps, they've asked you to come out and step at the front of the classroom and answer the maths question. Now you've got the teacher who's standing there in front of you, this big ominous figure asking you to answer a question. And then you've got the whole class in front of you with their eyes darting at you. Very confronting situation for anyone, let alone someone in school. And I know if that was me, my initial instinct would be curl up in a shell. I'd probably shit the bed. I'd feel the tension and I would want to kind of back down, and I wouldn't really know how to tackle that situation. What I read kind of said that having a fixed mindset in this situation is where you, in a way, you feel that tension and you kind of go into that shell because you're concerned about proving yourself. You're concerned about proving yourself right to the class, to the teacher, and the embarrassment in that moment is what shames you. Having a growth mindset is the contrary. Yes, you acknowledge that the tension is there. You feel those eyes darting at you still. You still feel a sense of confronting behavior from those around you. But you're willing to acknowledge this is the learning environment at the end of the day. And this is why I've been called out to answer this question, because I'm a novice and I don't really know the answer. So I'm here to learn. So it's about switching that mindset of the teacher and the class is coming out to attack me and to try navigate my level of IQ and catch me out in a way, versus, you know what? This is a learning environment and I actually don't know the answer, and I'm okay to admit that, and I'm okay to navigate through this with the teacher and instill that level of growth.
So what I hear there as well is, if you've got a growth mindset, you're not as fixated on the outcome. You're more so focused on how you can kind of self-actualize yourself. How can you can get better every day. You're not necessarily putting emphasis on the fact that you may be failing or you may not be up to scratch at this moment in time. Because I think as humans as well, especially when we're in our 20s and we do take up new skills, new tasks, and we're completely dog shit at it, it's very easy just to think we're not going to progress because we have limited experience to draw upon. For example, when you're in your late adolescence, early 20s, there's probably a couple things that you may have done since your childhood, whether it's play a sport and you've gotten quite good at. But suppose you're taking on a new career, new task, new skill, whatever the case may be. It's hard kind of as an individual in your 20s to kind of reassure yourself and say, although I'm quite shit at this now, there's no reason why I can't be good at it if I develop my skills. Again, because you don't have much experience to draw upon. Whereas when you're 40 or 50 and you encounter a new task, it might be a little bit easier to have that growth mindset because you do have that pool of experience. You can say, well, I've tried various amounts of tasks in my, throughout my life, and I've learned every time that I've gotten a little bit better. I've taken on feedback. So I think that's why it's also like emblematic, especially in your 20s, you're taking on new things.
Yeah,
so yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's really nice you noted there that, in your 40s or later in life, you're more willing to have that growth mindset because you can draw upon past experiences. So it begs the question, are we more vulnerable to a fixed mindset in our early years, in our adolescence, in our early 20s, in our school years? I think the answer is yes.
I can say 100% without me even being conscious of it. And I think it's funny because you brought up maths, but that was the one class where I always just accepted my skills might be in writing and like English and linguistics, but maths was such a weak point for me. So I always kind of just knew that, or I accepted that, if I got a bad mark on a certain assessment, I just thought that is just my math ability. I cannot progress. I can't get better. But then there would be times where I actually do need to do well because it was part of my kind of VC and whatnot. So I would try really hard, and I may have had to work harder at a subject like math because it wasn't my natural talent, not like English or something where, I wouldn't have to put as much effort because I was more comfortable with it. But I remember at that time, even I was telling myself, even if you just put in a little bit of effort, your skills aren't necessarily fixed, because even if it's something you're not natural with, your brain, your mind, you end up adapting. As humans, we are naturally able to evolve to things, but we have to make that active decision whether we want to evolve.
Exactly. And you hit the nail on the head there with the growth and fix, because you were able to recognize that I'm not great at maths, but it's something that I can work on to improve. So just by leaving the sentence there saying I'm not great at maths, period, there's your fixed mindset. But then coming along to say, but it's something that I can get better in, there's your growth mindset. And that's not to say that we can be anything we want in life, because that's naivety, right? I don't think having a growth mindset is adopting the belief that you can be anything you want, because you can't necessarily have the...
Do you mean rather you can't be everything, or you can be everything, but you can be anyone, but you can't be everything rather?
No, I know what you're trying to say, but I think you can't be anything, because someone with the maths mindset of, let's say, Albert Einstein, yes, he was a maths genius, but you can't necessarily get to that point if you don't genetically have that skill set, just like an Olympic runner might have the skill set to be an Olympic runner. Not everyone can be that, right? And that's okay to admit. And having a growth mindset is not saying that you can be anything, but it's saying that, you might not be great at something, but you're willing to improve, right?
I think you're right. I also think about it this way. If you're telling a new person about, the gospel of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, they can often say, well, isn't that just like a mindset hack? Like, is that just not based off of like scientific evidence? Or rather, it's based on nothing. It's just like a mental hack. And I don't think that's the case, because if you look at like the best elite performers in the world, people who are at the top of their game, doesn't matter what the craft is, they don't have a fixed mindset. They can't, because to be the top at something, you need to understand and you need to embrace that you can develop with every training session that you do, with every bit of feedback you receive. Because the motivation is gone as soon as you think, okay, well, I'm not getting any better at this. My skills are fixed. So I think it makes life even more exciting. It can drive a little bit of purpose. If you know that you can grow and know that you can get better at anything, it can be that fuel, that, as I like to say, kind of the fire in the belly.
Yeah, and I think you can relate that to, like you said, Olympians, sportsmen. And I'm not sure if this is the perfect analogy of a situation, but I remember hearing about like the gold medal,
Bobsled?
like gold medal syndrome or something. But
yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's something along the lines of how, an athlete might work towards a gold medal, and then they finally achieve that gold medal, and that's it. Like, they feel like that's their purpose, life's fulfilled, and they kind of go into a shell afterwards, and they start to have like a bit of an identity crisis perhaps, because it's, they've achieved that thing, and that's it. But that's where it separates the good to the great athletes, because the great athletes will still get those accolades and achievements, but they always believe that they can work towards something greater.
I reckon the reason that gold medal syndrome comes about is because as humans, we're naturally inclined to evolve to chase the next best thing. That's what was kind of instrumental to our survival back in those caveman days. For example, you killed a deer and you needed to eat. Well, sure, you killed a deer yesterday, but you still need to eat tomorrow. So you need to hunt something down. So I think that's just like ingrained in our evolution. What do you reckon?
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. And I know a lot of our listeners might be thinking right now, well, I think I have a growth mindset, but I also still think that there are some qualities about me that I just don't know can change, and I don't know will change. So I've got this book by my side here. It's called Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. If you're watching, here it is. We'll put it in the show notes because it's a great book. And now this book actually poses a few questions that challenges as to whether we have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. So I'm going to read out these questions, and I want you as the listener to ask yourself whether you agree with this question or whether you disagree with this question, and then we'll discuss them later. So the first question goes as follows. So question 1, your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change very much. Do you agree or disagree? Question 2, you can learn new things, but you can't really change how intelligent you are. Do you agree or disagree? Question 3, no matter how much intelligence you have, you can always change it quite a bit. Do you agree or disagree? And question 4, you can always substantially change how intelligent you are. Do you agree or disagree? Ilan, before we discuss the answers, what do you think? Firstly, about question 1, your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change very much. Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree completely. Completely disagree. I think that it doesn't make sense. Like I spoke about like in the last 10 minutes, when you take up any new skill set, any new hobby, you're going to end up learning and you're naturally going to evolve. So
okay, so there we go. So question 1 was a question about the fixed mindset. So if you answered you disagree,
I disagree,
then that shows elements of a growth mindset.
Woohoo.
Now,
Nice.
Question 2 was you can learn new things, but you can't really change how intelligent you are. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree. because they say, and it depends how how intelligence is measured, but if you're measuring it through IQ, I could be wrong, but they say IQ tends to be stable over time, meaning it might be quite difficult to increase it. That's not to say you can't have marginal increases in IQ, but yeah, I
That's fair enough. Funnily enough, question 2, that was also a fixed mindset question. So if you answered, you agree, that's a fixed mindset question, but that's all right. We'll move on.
That's all right.
That's all right. Question 3 was, no matter how intelligence you have, you can always change it quite a bit.
Well, that's similar to what I said before.
Agree or disagree?
Well, how are we defining quite a bit? Like
Open to interpretation.
IQ? Okay, maybe I don't know how we define intelligence.
Let's just say no matter how intelligent, how much intelligence you have, you can change it.
Yes, no, that I agree with.
Okay.
That I agree with. If we're not accounting for IQ, if we're accounting for different measures of intelligence,
Yeah.
sure, yes,
Okay.
you definitely can. And
Great. So that's an example of a growth-minded question. So if you said you agree with that statement, that's emblematic
Amazing.
of growth mindset. And then question 4 was, you can always substantially change how intelligent you are. You can always substantially change how intelligent you are.
well, again, similar to that question 3, I think, yeah, like an obvious one. I reckon you can.
Yeah. Again, that's an example of a growth mindset question. Now, funnily enough, these questions do go on to say that you can be a mixture of both, but most people lean towards one or the other. So I think that was emblematic of your answers. I think it was question 2 where it was more emblematic of the fixed mindset, but the others were growth mindset, which you nailed. So if you're listening and if you answered the questions along as well as the listener, it's okay to have answered the contrary of what the book might say for the other, because we've just learned here that you can be a mixture of both, but typically we'd lean towards one side more than the other.
Well, I suppose that awareness is, first of all, crucial, because you can't really do anything before you have that self-awareness. So I think that's a really kind of good exercise we just did, is because whilst I may have thought that I've got a growth mindset because I know the value of it, that's not necessarily the case, because I think as humans we have our implicit biases and our own cognitive predispositions where we might just naturally think that our skills are fixed, we can't grow. But yeah, it seems like a very fascinating read.
Exactly. So shout out to Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. Go get that. It's a 1 million copy bestseller, and we'll put in the show notes. Great book about mindset. And I think a lot of those questions, they kind of went on the train of thought that there's possibility to change. So I think if you're always going to have that in your mind, that you can change, you can evolve, you can adapt no matter what the task is, that's emblematic of being a growth-minded person versus just being, you know what, this is embedded in me, I can't do better. And I know for me personally back in school, that was very much the case. And we said, are you more vulnerable to a fixed mind in school? And I think we definitely are, because I think it's actually kind of how the school system trains us to be. And this is kind of digressing a little bit, but when you've got your classes like your maths and your English, and the grading process and the assessment process is very much A, B, C, D, pass or fail. It kind of leads us as students and young students to think we're good at this or we're shit at this.
So do you reckon it kind of pigeonholes us into like a binary, good
Definitely.
or bad? Yeah,
Definitely.
I think that's where, I've had some incredible teachers when I was at school, and any time that I wasn't too pleased with a certain mark that I got, they always tried to emphasize that, look, this is just, as that magic term we were using, it's just, you may have not done well at this moment in time. And they were always, without them realizing it, they were always providing feedback, because the idea is I'm going to integrate it and I'm going to improve.
Yeah.
So at another point in time, you could say I would be pigeonholed as getting a good mark, right? So I think that's really interesting. But you look at elite sports clubs, right? Those teams that may have not done very well one year, like they got the wooden spoon and then they had a meteoric rise. And we mentioned earlier, but they would have had to implement some sort of growth mindset They would have just had to accept the fact that, yeah, they may have done really poorly. And then whether they had, a club restructure, an amazing preseason, they would have fixed certain things up. Again, that wouldn't be achievable with a fixed mindset. That's why I think high performance coaches get way more credit now than they ever used to. Because instructing, people to optimize their brains, or rather their mindset, to yield them the best sort of results, it's something that can be done.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can take a lot away from athletes as students, as people in school, as people in university, is to not hide from our deficiencies like an athlete wouldn't hide from their deficiencies.
And don't you reckon if you've got a fixed mindset, again, we kind of spoke about this a few weeks ago, but it's funny how all these things kind of tie in together. You are more vulnerable to tying in your abilities with your self-worth.
Yeah, definitely.
You put so much emphasis that this is your skill level at this point in time, hence, therefore, this is reflective of my self-worth.
Definitely. That was fully me in school. That was fully me. We spoke about it. Yeah, like I was the kid that was a little bit better in English, a little bit better in sciences, but not great at maths. And like that's how I thought it was. And that's kind of what you pigeonhole yourself to be. Coming out of school, I think that's where you kind of start to learn that, you know what, like uni doesn't care about that. Uni doesn't care what your strengths are, because we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, but it's not to say we can't work on them. In school, in the VCE system, you can kind of choose to not work on your weaknesses, right? You can choose the subjects that you're good at and you can just go hammer and tong on those subjects and really nail those, which is fine. That's how our school system works. But uni doesn't care about that. Uni has the structure for you. Besides electives, you've got all your core subjects and you have to do them and you have to nail them. Now, if you're not particularly strong at writing or essay writing or maths or whatever it is, you need to work on those deficiencies. So I think uni was really good at teaching me that, and teaching me that I can't now hide from my deficiencies. I need to train myself to grow, even if it's in areas that I'm not comfortable with.
So assuming that you've implemented a growth mindset, how important does it become to surround yourself around people who can supplement that growth mindset rather than denigrating you and saying, yeah, you can't do this, you got to be realistic to your own abilities?
I think it works both ways as well. I think you need to have, whether it's friends around you or a partner around you, that challenges your growth. As much as you don't want to have a partner or friends around you that just dap up how good you are in a certain area, right? I think that's really detrimental to us, is if, we've got a partner or we've got friends that always just say how good we might be at something. And you see a lot of this on like social media as well. Like you look at comment section on photos and it's all about like how good someone is, like how good they look, which is fine. Like it's, that's a public forum. It's a bit different. Like maybe that's a shit analogy, but I think
awful analogy. Come on, mate.
But I think it's good to have people around us that don't just dap us up, but challenge us and challenge our mindset, because we might not have a growth mindset in all areas. So we need that to be challenged. And if it's not going to come from ourselves, it's going to come from the people that we hang out with.
And the thing is, growth is going to be uncomfortable. It's not a pleasant feeling, because anytime you're uncomfortable, it's because you're doing something out of your comfort zone. Hence, you're probably forced to adapt. But being in a fixed mentality is also uncomfortable. Knowing that you can't progress, telling yourself that there's no room for improvement, telling yourself that the ceiling is going to prohibit you from developing, that's also uncomfortable. So I think it's up to us to decide what uncomfortable we want to try, right? Do you want to have the feelings of uncomfortability doing something where you can develop, or the feelings of uncomfortability where you tell yourself there's no point trying because I'm fixed?
And that's why I think traveling is so good for us, which we spoke about a couple of weeks ago. Traveling or moving out of home, these are really good things because it forces you to be uncomfortable. It kind of encourages us to have that fire under our bum, which puts the pressure on us to go out there and accomplish and achieve something.
And I reckon one of the best ways you could probably start optimizing for a growth mindset is by voluntarily doing things where like for example, picking new tasks. So putting yourself in situations where you have to actively decide, am I going to have a growth or a fixed mindset? The reason I say that is because chances are anytime you do something in life, you're going to reach some obstacles, involuntarily, maybe at work, maybe at uni, where you have to do an assignment, right? And you'll be forced to either decide, am I going to have a growth or a fixed mindset? By putting yourself in a position where you can constantly take up new tasks or skills, you're training yourself to get good at that task of saying, okay, I might be really shit at this at the moment, but look, man, with enough practice, with enough feedback, with enough relentlessness, I'm going to get better at it. And what that does is when you do kind of reach those critical obstacles and crossroads where you're forced to implement a growth or a fixed mindset. Suppose, something tragic really happens and maybe not something tragic, but suppose you're in a situation where you're called upon.
Well, yeah, even if, like you said, something tragic does happen, or you are called upon, it's going to put you in better stead in those situations if you have a growth mindset.
Correct. And again, as I said, the best way to develop that is to voluntarily put yourself in situations where you can develop that. Almost just like mimicking that training environment. It's almost like the same thing that boxers do. They spar with, their sparring coaches just to prep them for a fight. So I think it's like with anything in life, you got to practice it and mimic those environmental cues. So when, it is your time, implementing that growth mindset might not be that difficult. Tell me though, what would you say to someone in school who, they've just listened to this podcast and they probably acknowledge that they have more of a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset, but they want to develop that growth mindset? What would you say to that individual?
Yeah, really good question. I think firstly, acknowledging it's normal to have elements of a fixed mindset. It's okay. We can't always be so growth mindset fixated on every task. We're going to have our strengths, we're going to have our weaknesses. But I think acknowledging when tasks are tough, when you find yourself being challenged, is the first step. Then the next part is in your control as to how you attack the situation. Either you can choose to essentially crumble, go into a shell, look at the task and be like, nah, mate, can't do. Or you can say to yourself, you know what? This might be shit. This might be tough. And it might take me a few cracks at trying to understand this, but I'm willing to give it a go and I'm willing to ask those around me for help. I think that's what I would have liked to have been told in school, especially in like year 10, 11, when you start to think about VCE studies and what you're going to study further down the line. Because there are definitely moments in school, I know I had and others had as well, where you struggle to kind of feel like you're strong in a certain area. And if you're one of those kids that you're not sure what your strengths are in school, you don't know if you're better in some subjects versus others, or in uni for that matter, it can be really overwhelming and confronting, because you're like, well, I don't know what my strengths are. I don't know where to turn. I don't know what to choose, right? So I think adopting the belief that it's okay to not be strong in certain areas, but I can get stronger and I can ask questions to people. And if I really want to get better in a certain area, well, it's up to me to apply myself.
So I suppose, it just comes down to that personal agency, whether you do it or whether you don't. And there's this quote by Tony Robbins, and he said that most people underachieve or overestimate what they can get done in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can get done in 10 years. And he's kind of a big proponent of this whole growth mindset. So the things that you can achieve in 10 years is not going to be fueled by having that fixed mindset. So I think that the earlier you can recognize it, the earlier that you can be aware of it, the higher the chances are that you set yourself up for success.
Definitely. So I think we would have loved to have been told these things in school. So hopefully our listeners can really find some value in this as well.
And look, just like another point. No other point, I reckon, actually.
All right. I'll just go. And look, we can wrap it up.
Yeah. And look, guys, I think that kind of concludes our discussion of a growth versus fixed mindset. It's one of those topics that, again, it's going to be quite pertinent in our late adolescence and early 20s. What we do hope we're able to provide you guys with some value as to why it's so important. Before we go though, we'd love to again express our love and gratitude to all of our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to rate us 5 stars. And
share it to someone that you think might benefit from it, because at the end of the day, we all want to grow, don't we? So
exactly,
if there are people out there that you think might really like to enjoy hearing these sentiments and listening to this episode, flick it across to them and let's all grow together.
Why not pay it forward, eh?
Pay it forward. Alrighty. Thanks guys for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.
See ya.
Bye.